The cafe went silent. The man in the corner slammed his cup down so hard it nearly shattered, then shouted, "Do you even know who I am?" Everyone froze. This was David King, the millionaire nobody dared to challenge. But what he didn't know was that the new waitress had no fear, and in the next 60 seconds, she was about to humiliate him in front of the entire room and change him forever. Clang! A silver spoon hit the porcelain saucer with a force that made the cup tremble. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The hiss of the espresso machine seemed to fade, and for a moment, the entire cafe froze in time. "Stop talking and bring me my coffee." The man's voice was deep, sharp, and filled with a kind of authority that didn't ask. It demanded. Every head slowly turned toward the corner booth. There he was, David King. The name alone was enough to make stomachs tighten. He wasn't just rich. He was the millionaire of the town, owner of half the property on Main Street, investor in 3 tech companies, and rumored to have political connections that could ruin careers with a single phone call. But none of that made him admirable. No, what people remembered about David wasn't his money. It was his mouth. He was rude, blunt, disrespectful. If your food was late by 30 seconds, he'd humiliate you in front of everyone. If your coffee wasn't hot enough, he'd act like you'd committed a crime. And the scariest part? He enjoyed it. You could see it in the way his lips curved into that smug half-smile every time someone stammered an apology. It wasn't just employees who avoided him. Customers did too. The moment he walked in, regulars would finish their drinks a little faster, as if his presence made the air heavier. Today was no different. The moment David entered the cafe, the energy shifted. The bell above the door rang. Sunlight poured in, and then he appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. His shoes shined like mirrors. His tie was a perfect Windsor knot, and his gold watch caught the light every time he moved. But beneath that polished exterior was the same man everyone feared. He had barely sat down before the complaint started. "Why is the table sticky?" he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you people not clean?" The young barista, a boy who looked barely 20, rushed over with a damp cloth, his hands trembling. Sorry, Mr. King. Let me fix that right away." David didn't even look at him. He was already flipping open the menu, not because he didn't know what to order. He always ordered the same thing, but because it gave him an excuse to keep people waiting. The barista cleaned the table, nodded politely, and asked, "Can I get you your usual latte?" David's eyes flicked up. "Did I say I wanted the usual? Or did you just decide for me?" His voice was sharp enough to cut through the boy's confidence. A couple at the next table exchanged an awkward glance, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to say anything. And that was the way it always went. No one spoke up, no one challenged him. Not the regulars, not the staff, not even the manager. Because David had a reputation, not just for being mean, but for getting even. He'd once gotten a waiter fired for attitude, and rumor had it, he'd pulled strings to make sure the guy couldn't get another job in town. So when he slammed his spoon down now, there wasn't a single person who thought to defend the staff. Not one. Instead, they all did what they always did. Looked away, pretended they didn't hear, and waited for the storm to pass. But today would be different. Because in the corner of the cafe, tying her new black apron around her waist, was someone who didn't know the rules yet. Maya Johnson, tall, graceful, with skin the color of warm mahogany and eyes that could switch from gentle to unshakable in a heartbeat. She was new, just 4 days on the job, and still figuring out the layout of the place. But even in her short time here, she'd heard about him. The warnings had been clear. Don't argue with him. Keep your head down. Do whatever he asks. But Maya wasn't wired like that. She'd grown up in a house where her mother taught her one unshakable truth. Never let anyone treat you like you're less than them. Respect wasn't a privilege reserved for the rich. It was a basic human courtesy, and it went both ways. So when she heard David's voice slice through the cafe like a whip, she didn't just hear another customer complaint. She heard disrespect. And disrespect she could not ignore. She glanced up from behind the counter, her eyes locking on the source of the commotion. The young barista was standing there, looking like a deer in headlights, while David's glare burned into him. The room was still. You could almost hear the tension in the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on everyone. David leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers impatiently against the polished wooden table. His watch caught the light again, and his expression was clear. I am in control here. But Maya? She saw something else. She didn't see power. She saw a man so used to people shrinking around him that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be challenged. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision, one that would flip the entire cafe on its head. The millionaire was about to meet someone who wasn't afraid of him, not in the slightest. From that morning on, something in the cafe felt different. David still came in. Same corner booth, same latte order, but the way he carried himself had shifted. He no longer barked orders across the room. He waited his turn. He said please and thank you. And each time Maya brought his drink, he greeted her with a polite, "Good morning, Maya," like they were old friends. It didn't go unnoticed. The regulars who used to tense up when the bell over the door chime began to relax. Conversations no longer died when he walked in. Even Greg, the manager, admitted one afternoon, "I never thought I'd see the day David King would be well human in here." One rainy Tuesday, as the cafe's windows blurred with raindrops, David lingered by the counter before leaving. Maya was restocking the pastry case when she heard him say, quietly, "You know, you did me a favor that first day, more than you realize." She looked up, curious. "How's that?" "You reminded me of my grandmother," he said with a faint smile. "She always told me respect was the one thing no one could take from you. Guess I forgot along the way." Maya returned the smile. "Then I'm glad you remembered." He tipped an imaginary hat, something she never would have imagined him doing that first morning, and stepped out into the rain. Inside, the cafe felt warmer than ever. And that's the story of how one new waitress changed the most feared man in town, without shouting, without insults, just with courage and respect. Because here's the truth. Money can buy you coffee, but it can't buy you kindness. And sometimes it only takes one person brave enough to speak up to change an entire room, and maybe even a person's life. Maya was wiping down a table near the front window when she heard the soft clink of a cup being set down behind her. "Excuse me." She turned to see David standing, not lounging in his booth like a king on a throne, but actually standing, holding his empty latte cup. It was such an unusual sight that several customers glanced up immediately. No one had ever seen him leave his booth to approach the counter. Usually, he snapped his fingers or waved someone over like he was summoning a servant. "Yes?" Maya asked, her tone polite but neutral. David glanced around, then leaned slightly closer, so his voice wouldn't carry too far. "I was out of line earlier." Maya blinked. It wasn't much, but coming from him, those words were monumental. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied simply. He shifted the cup in his hands, almost like he didn't know what to do with it. "You're right, about respect." There was a murmur from one of the side tables. People were trying to look like they weren't eavesdropping, but the entire cafe was hanging on every word. David glanced toward the register, then back at her. "I'd like to pay for everyone here. Whatever they will order before I leave, put it on my tab." The hum of conversation in the cafe suddenly went still. Then, a few seats away, someone let out a low, "Whoa." Maya tilted her head. "Are you sure about that?" David nodded. "Yeah. Consider it my way of making the morning a little better. For everyone." She gave him a small smile, not overly enthusiastic, but genuine. "That's thoughtful of you." When she turned to ring it into the register, David addressed the room without raising his voice too much. "Enjoy your coffee, folks. It's on me today." The reaction was immediate. Surprise, laughter, grateful thanks, even a few claps. Ethan, still manning the espresso machine, mouthed what is happening to Maya. David returned to his booth, but the way people looked at him now was different. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity, maybe even a little respect. And David, he didn't check his phone once. He just sat there, sipping a glass of water, watching the cafe come alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. As Maya moved to take another order from a nearby table, David found himself watching her. Not in the way he used to watch people, searching for weakness, but with a strange curiosity. She wasn't afraid of him. Not once. Not even when he'd pushed her. Most people crumbled under his tone. Some avoided him entirely. But she stood there like a wall that refused to be knocked down. He took another slow sip of his latte, letting the foam settle on his tongue. It was good. Perfect, even. He hated to admit it, but she'd done it better than most baristas he'd encountered. And he'd been to the best cafes in the country. That's when the memories started to creep in. The smell of coffee beans grinding, not in some trendy cafe, but in a cramped corner store his father used to run. He was 16 then, working after school, wearing an apron much like hers. Customers would come in, some polite, some impatient, some downright rude. And every single time his grandmother, who also worked the counter, would tell him the same thing. David, you treat everyone with kindness, even the mean ones. You never know what they're carrying. Back then, he'd listened. Back then, respect had meant something. But things had changed after his father died. David threw himself into business, hungry for money and power, determined never to feel small or powerless again. The richer he got, the colder he became. And slowly, without even realizing it, he started treating people the way he'd once hated being treated. Like they didn't matter. A voice cut into his thoughts. You all right over there? He looked up to see the elderly man from the counter, someone he vaguely recognized as a daily regular, smiling at him. Just thinking, David said. The man leaned in a little. You know, I've been coming here for 5 years. Never seen anyone stand up to you like that. David raised a brow. And you approve? The man chuckled. I think she's the first person to remind you you're human. David glanced toward the back of the cafe where Maya was handing a slice of pie to a little girl and asking about her day. She was smiling, genuine and warm, the kind of smile that made people feel seen. It was a smile David realized he hadn't given anyone in a long, long time. He turned back to his latte, letting the warmth of the cup seep into his hands. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his next meeting or the deal he was closing. He wasn't thinking about his bank account. He was thinking about the look in Maya's eyes when she'd said, "Respect goes both ways." And maybe, just maybe, she was right. David sat back in the booth, one arm stretched casually along the backrest, but his eyes were locked on Maya in a way that was no longer dismissive. It was analytical. He lifted the cup again, taking a slow sip. This time, instead of immediately looking for something to criticize, he actually tasted it. His brow twitched, not in displeasure, but in reluctant approval. Better, he said again, softer this time. Hot, smooth, foam's right. Maya gave the faintest smile. Good. Then maybe we can both enjoy some peace this morning. David set the cup down, but didn't pick up his phone like he usually did. Instead, he looked around the cafe. The customers weren't avoiding his gaze anymore. A few even met his eyes briefly before returning to their own drinks. It was subtle, but David could feel it, the shift in the room's energy. For years, he'd been the storm cloud that rolled in and made everyone scatter. But now it felt like the cloud was lifting. He glanced back at Maya. You're new here. For days, she said simply. And you already think you can teach me manners? Her smile didn't fade. I'm not trying to teach you anything. I'm just reminding you, respect goes both ways. David's smirk returned, but this time there was no bite in it. You sound like my grandmother, he said with a low chuckle. She used to tell me that. Back before, his voice trailed off. Back before what? Maya asked. He shrugged. Back before I got too busy to care. There was a small crack in the armor. Not much, but enough for Maya to see something beneath the arrogance. From the counter, Ethan quietly approached a refill pot for another table, pretending not to eavesdrop but clearly hanging on every word. Greg, the manager, was openly watching now, leaning against the espresso machine with folded arms. Maya kept her tone light. Well, maybe it's not too late to care again. David tilted his head, studying her. You think one conversation over a cup of coffee is going to change me? I think one person can, she said. If you let them. The words lingered between them. David leaned back again, but instead of reaching for his phone or signaling for Bill, he stayed seated, sipping the latte slowly, as if he wanted to stretch the moment. Around them, the cafe came back to life. The tension that had once pressed against the walls was gone. Conversations picked up, laughter returned, and the clinking of cups filled the air. For the first time in a long time, David wasn't the center of fear in the room. He was just another man having coffee. And maybe he liked that. The cafe's atmosphere had changed, but only slightly. The tension was still there, just different now. It wasn't the tight, fearful kind that made people shrink into their seats. It was the kind that kept eyes glued to the corner booth, wondering what would happen next. Maya returned to the counter, where Ethan was still standing, pale-faced and wide-eyed. "You're making him another coffee," he whispered, as if she'd just agreed to walk into a lion's cage. "Yes," Maya replied simply, reaching for a clean cup. Ethan leaned closer. "You know he's going to find something wrong with it, right? He always does." Maya's hands moved steadily as she prepared the drink, her every motion deliberate, measuring the coffee, steaming the milk just to the right temperature. "Then I'll make sure it's perfect," she said. From the corner of her eye, she could see David watching her. Not just watching, studying. His elbows rested on the table, one hand rubbing his chin as if he was trying to figure her out. When the drink was ready, Maya placed it on a small tray and carried it back to his booth. The soft clink of the cup meeting the saucer sounded louder than it should have. "Your latte," she said, placing it gently in front of him. David looked at the cup for a long moment before glancing up at her. "Do you know why I push people?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Because you can?" A slow smile tugged at his lips. "Because it shows me who's worth keeping around." She crossed her arms lightly, not in defiance, but in quiet confidence. Or maybe it just shows who's too afraid to stand up for themselves. That made him pause. His smirk faltered, just for a second, but Maya caught it. From across the cafe, a few customers exchanged small nods, as if silently cheering her on. An older man by the window muttered under his breath, "About time someone said it." David took a sip of the latte, his eyes never leaving hers. "Better," he said at last. "Much better." "Good," she replied. "Maybe now we can both enjoy the morning." But David wasn't done. He set the cup down, leaning forward so only she could hear. "You've got courage. I'll give you that. But courage can be dangerous." Her voice was calm, steady. "So can arrogance." The words hit like a quiet slap, and for the first time, David didn't have a quick comeback. He sat back slowly, as if recalculating his approach. The cafe was still buzzing with that electric energy, but now it wasn't fear that filled the room. It was anticipation. Everyone could tell something was shifting. David's fingers drummed slowly on the table, the gold of his watch glinting with every tap. His smirk was still there, but his eyes had sharpened. The rest of the cafe was silent, yet thick with anticipation. Even the hiss of steaming milk from the espresso machine seemed distant, like the whole room was holding its breath. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, voice low but cutting. "This latte," he picked up the cup by its delicate handle, turning it slightly, "is lukewarm. The foam is sloppy. And if this is the kind of service you give, then maybe you should be working in a gas station instead of cafe." A collective flinch rippled through the room. Customers averted their eyes, unwilling to get caught in his line of fire. But Maya didn't move. She didn't shrink back. Her posture was calm, steady, her hands resting lightly on the tray she carried. "I can make you another one," she said, her voice firm but even. David chuckled, slow, mocking. "Another one? And what makes you think I want you making it?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because I'll make it right. And because I respect every customer who walks in here, even the ones who make it hard." For a second, his smirk faltered. The words landed, though he tried to hide it. From a corner table, an elderly woman in a knitted cardigan tilted her head, watching with a small, approving smile. At another, a young man with a laptop lowered his screen just enough to see the unfolding scene. David leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But bold doesn't fix bad coffee. Neither does rudeness, Maya replied, her tone steady. Sir, you came in here for a drink, not a fight. A murmur of agreement swept through a few tables, so soft it was almost unnoticeable. David's gaze darted briefly toward the room, and he caught it. The subtle shift in atmosphere. People were watching. People were silently rooting for her. His eyes narrowed. You know what your problem is? He asked. Maya tilted her head slightly. I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think you can talk to me like we're equals, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But we're not. I could buy this cafe 10 times over and fire every last one of you. Maya didn't flinch. Maybe you could, but money doesn't buy the right to treat people like they're beneath you. For the first time, the room didn't just hold its breath. It felt like it was leaning in. Even Greg, the manager, had paused mid-pour behind the counter, pretending to be busy while clearly listening. David's smirk returned, but there was something different in it now. Less mockery. More intrigue. You've got guts, he said slowly, picking up the cup again. But guts don't make good coffee. Maya gave a small, polite smile. No, but respect makes everything better, even coffee. A beat of silence. Then David's laugh rang out. Not his usual sharp, sarcastic laugh, but something almost genuine. Almost. Fine, he said at last. Make me another one. Let's see if you're as good as you talk. Maya nodded once, coming right up as she turned toward the counter. The tension that had hung over the cafe for so long began to shift. A few customers exchanged glances, small smiles tugging at their lips. And David King, the man everyone feared, sat back in his seat, watching her go, with an expression no one in the room could quite read. Maya Johnson adjusted her apron and took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't one to jump into a fight without thinking, but she could already feel her instincts kicking in. She glanced toward the counter where the cafe manager, a soft-spoken man named Greg, was busy steaming milk for another order. His eyes flicked nervously toward David's table, then quickly back to his work, as if he wanted no part in the brewing storm. The young barista, Ethan, she'd learned, was still standing there, holding a lukewarm latte like it was a ticking bomb. His voice trembled as he tried again. I can, make you a fresh one, sir. No problem. David didn't even look at him this time. He waved a dismissive hand, muttering, Forget it. Just get me someone who knows what they're doing. That was it. Maya stepped forward. Not too fast. Not too aggressive. Just enough for the soft tap-tap of her shoes to draw attention. The customers glanced up, curious. Ethan's eyes widened when he realized she was heading straight toward David's booth. In her mind, she could hear her mother's voice again. It's not about shouting louder. It's about standing taller. When she reached the table, Maya didn't rush into speaking. She placed one hand lightly on the edge of the booth, leaned forward just enough to make her presence felt, and smiled. Not a nervous smile, but one that said, I'm not intimidated by you. Good morning, sir, she said evenly. I hear there's a problem with your coffee. David looked up slowly, his gaze moving from her neatly tied apron to her steady eyes. Most people looked away under that stare. Maya didn't. Yeah, there's a problem, David replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It's cold, and apparently so is the service. She nodded once, keeping her voice calm. I can make you another one right now. He leaned back, smirking. I don't want another one. I want someone here who actually knows how to make coffee. Do you? From the other side of the room, a man sipping tea nearly choked at the boldness of the exchange. No one ever talked to David King like this. Maya didn't blink. Sir, I've been making coffee for years. But more importantly, I believe good coffee starts with respect. And right now, I'm not seeing much of it coming from you. A couple of gasps slipped out from nearby tables. Ethan froze behind the counter, eyes darting between them like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. David tilted his head, studying her as if deciding whether to laugh or get angry. Respect, huh? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Yes, Maya said, her voice firm but polite. You're a customer in this cafe, and that's all I need to know. For a long moment. The only sounds were the soft clinks of cups from other tables and the faint hum of the fridge behind the counter. Every person in that cafe was holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. But it didn't come. Not yet. David's smirk twitched, like he wasn't used to people speaking to him this way. "You've got some nerve, I'll give you that." Maya straightened her back just a little taller. Not nerve, just a belief that every person in this room, staff and customer, deserves to be treated with dignity. The words hung in the air, and for the first time since David had walked in, the tension in the room wasn't from fear. It was from curiosity.